because of the work of 5 Republicans, Jim Jordan, Troy Nehls, Jim Banks, Rodney Davis, and Kelly Armstrong, they went out and got the contemporaneous text messages and emails that were going between Pelosi staff and the security staff and the Capitol Police. And they put the lie to something that Nancy Pelosi said when she looked into the cameras on February 9th, 2021, and said, I couldn't have influenced the security. I have no power over the Capitol Police. These emails and these text messages show just the opposite. Nancy Pelosi and her staff were directly involved in meeting with Capitol Police and the security planners in the House Sergeant at Arms going back to early December. Multiple meetings, most times cutting out the Republican colleagues from any of the knowledge that they had. The staff of Pelosi was so involved, they actually were editing some of the plans on January 4th and January 5th. They were directly involved, which means the opportunity to prevent this attack wasn't just a failure of the Capitol Police, it was a failure of the political leadership of Nancy Pelosi and her leaders. The media and Nancy Pelosi have been trying to debunk this. These 5 lawmakers with no budget, none of the subpoena power, none of the cameras of the January 6th committee went and got the evidence of how the Capitol security failures occurred and how they landed at the desk of Nancy Pelosi.
Okay, don't waste your time. I have no power over the Capitol Police. Does anybody not know that?
They set us the fuck up. That's what they did. They set up 64. Oh, absolutely. And then they asked y'all to come 2 hours later. They set us up. They needed everybody right away. Nah, right away. They set us the fuck up. So nah, we ain't got shit. We ain't got no motherfucking thing. They set us the fuck up. Take this motherfucker. Shit. They set us the fuck up. I'm hot.
Here, you need water? Nah, here.
One thing that was clear in previous testimony in this committee, corroborated by this testimony today, is that, troops from National Guard were authorized by the president at the time, Donald Trump, on January 4. They were authorized. It was testified in this committee they were authorized. D.C. was able to take advantage of them in the capacity that D.C. wanted, save for the couple of requests that you also wanted. One thing it's important to indicate, Mr. Chairman, is that for National Guard troops to be deployed to the Capitol, it requires the Capitol Police Board to actually issue a state of emergency for troops to come on Capitol grounds. And the police board is made up of the architect of the Capitol, the head of Senate security, the head of House security, and the chief of the Capitol Police. And by my understanding, 3 of those 4 people report to the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House at that time was Nancy Pelosi. So when we want to talk about National Guard being here and the timetable of them getting here, it's important to understand that there were National Guard in the District of Columbia, and their limitation of coming to the Capitol was not due to anybody else, because the president is not authorized to deploy troops to the Capitol, separation of powers. It is at the hands of the Speaker of the House.
Back into chambers. That would have been call number 3 with Speaker Pelosi.
So you didn't have 1 call, you didn't have 2 calls, you had 3 calls. So Speaker Pelosi's comments that she didn't speak to you are inaccurate.
That is correct, sir.
Today we're here to discuss the security failures that occurred on January 6, 2021, and how we can prevent these failures from occurring again. I want to dive into the questions, Chief Son. In your transcribed interview, you mentioned that you met with the House Sergeant at Arms regarding the National Guard prior to January 6th. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And who was the House Sergeant at Arms leading up to and on January 6th?
That would be Paul Irving.
And the House Sergeant at Arms is appointed by who?
It was appointed at that time by Speaker Pelosi.
And in your transcribed interview, you mentioned that when you first brought up the National Guard to the House Sergeant at Arms in the days leading up to January 6th, that Mr. Irving said he, quote, didn't like the optics, end quote. Is that correct?
That is correct. He referenced being concerned for optics.
And on January 6th, when you went to Mr. Irving to get his approval to call in the Guard, Mr. Irving said he would, quote, run it up the chain. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That was a telephone call. I didn't see him in person when I first made that request.
The House Sergeant at Arms is considered probably the most senior security official on the House side. When Mr. Irving says he has to, quote, run it up the chain, end quote, what did that mean?
I took that to mean his leadership chain.
And who would be his leadership chain? If he's functionally the most senior security official on the House side, correct?
That's his title. That's part of the title, the senior law enforcement official for the House of Representatives. But he would have been referring to the leadership team that goes up to Speaker Pelosi.
So the political leadership team, meaning elected officials, not another security official. Is that your
that is correct, sir? He's the top security official for the House.
So running up the chain would most likely, in your opinion, is through the Speaker's office and possibly to Speaker Pelosi?
That would be where it ends, yes.
Okay, so let's park that there, and then let's jump to a second set here. In a press conference on January 7th, Speaker Pelosi called for your resignation on national television. Speaker Pelosi also stated that she had not talked to you since the initial breach of the Capitol. But according to your transcribed interview, you were on the phone with Speaker Pelosi a few times. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, that is correct. I spoke to Speaker Pelosi 3 times that evening, and she went on national TV and said I'd never spoken to her, but I spoke to her 3 times. The three times were the first time when I went over to brief Vice President Pence at the secure location. I had called House Sergeant Arms Irving, told him I was going over to brief the Vice President. I was also going over to do a personal assessment of the Capitol. At that point, things were getting under control. Went over there, briefed him on when we can get them back into chambers with, Mr. Irving being fully aware. He said he wanted to get Speaker Pelosi on the phone. He made a phone call from his cell phone at approximately 5:34, where I first briefed Speaker Pelosi. The second call was when I left that location. As I was walking away, I met up with Mr. Stenger, and we started walking over to the Senate to go brief the Senate. When Jennifer Hemingway, I believe it was Jennifer Hemingway, handed me the cell phone, and it was Emily Barrett's cell phone calling her, and it was Speaker Pelosi on the other line. This is my second call with Speaker Pelosi, questioning the information I'd given to Vice President Pence about when we can get back into chambers. I assured her that information was correct. I could get them back into chambers by 7 p.m., and the call ended. That was call number 2. Call number 3 was 6:25 p.m. I was over at the Senate from the secure location, from where the Senate had been sequestered, and on a cell phone using Robert Karam's cell phone, they dialed leadership, who was over off-site at a secure location, and I briefed all of the leadership of the plans to get them back into chambers. That would have been call number 3 with Speaker Pelosi.
So you didn't have 1 call, you didn't have 2 calls, you had 3 calls. So Speaker Pelosi's comments that she didn't speak to you are inaccurate.
That is correct, sir.
Let me shift gears and go back as it relates to the optics of bringing people up to Capitol Hill and running things up the chain of command, ultimately to the Speaker's office. Do you think Speaker Pelosi's office or Speaker Pelosi herself politicized Capitol security?
I have no idea on that, sir.
Okay. Any other clarifications you'd like to make as it relates to Speaker Pelosi's comments that you didn't speak to her?
I just, wish she had considered that, wish she had considered some of the stuff that I've faced and the efforts I went through to bring in the outside resources on that day before she called for my resignation.
Thank you very much for being here. I yield back.
Dr. Murphy for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I swear, why do we not have bipartisan support in getting to the bottom of this is beyond me. It's everything about Trump. Captain Nick, the summer before in 2020, when there was an absolute disaster in this country where riots and burning of federal buildings occur, we saw billions of dollars, multiple deaths occur. Speaker Pelosi, I believe, is culpable with part of this in allowing this, paving the way for the terrible thing to happen on January 6th, to just dismiss America's memory of what happened the summer before. In contrast, the protests at Capitol on January 6th, which we know were all wrong, there was no hesitation in creating a politicized community. And we had a former Republican who saw it as a personal grind to go after President Trump, basically not allowing evidence to come before the committee. It's been more than 3 years, and members of the D.C. National Guard are coming forward with your oath to provide clarity. I'll just ask Captain Nick, in your testimony, you mentioned you were a confidential source for the Select Committee. In addition, you go on to state, my confidentiality was breached to the national media. Would you mind expanding upon that?
Yes, sir. First, I'd like to correct the record from a previous statement from your colleague. When he asked a question about Pentagon officials and their desire to send troops, I said absolutely. I meant they did not at the time want to send troops to the Capitol, just for clarification. I was informally, after January 6th, at some time after, I was informally interviewed by the Select Committee on January 6th. I gave informal testimony and hired counsel from Tully Rickney, Dan Meyer, who's also behind me. After giving my written notes and informal testimony, a couple weeks later, I was contacted by Political from a news outlet, from a writer requesting comment on my handwritten notes they got a copy of. I then contacted Dan, who then contacted the Select Committee to resolve that. But it had to be leaked at some point from probably the select committee, because that's the only people I talked to and gave my notes to.
It is it is obviously evident with anybody with an objective eye that the committee was put forth to tell one thing. If that committee had gone in front of anything in a legal department, you would have cross-examination, other witnesses, etc. We never saw any of that to get to the actual truth, which is what all Americans, whether you're which party or not, should believe in doing. Period. Period. I just want to reiterate something. This is actually, I guess, to Colonel Matthews and General Dean. Turning to the matter of security, Secretary of the Army and McCarthy have said the D.C. National Guard was not prepared for immediate deployment. Do you agree with that statement?
That statement is false. We were prepared in many ways. We even had backup plans. We call them branches and sequels, right? So not only did we have a force that was at Andrews Air Force Base that was training and doing civil disturbance that weekend, prepared to deploy on that day, that was ready to deploy on that day, we also had traffic control points that were at MPD, and those members had riot control gear in the trunk, not visible to the public, but for their self-protection, in case MPD had to respond, they had the appropriate gear to provide civil disturbance, riot control efforts if needed. And so we had the capability, we had the planning, we had the know-how. So the question that I have is, so out of all the events, out of all the inaugurations the District of Columbia National Guard supported, out of all the NATO summits, out of all the IMF protests that we've had, the summer 2020, COVID, we were not able to respond to this, we're incapable, that's categorically false.
I find it just, my time is short, but I just find it a slap in the face to all the good men and women who serve in our armed forces to say you're not prepared. A slap in the face. And because this guy wanted to save his butt with the hope of getting in the Biden administration, that's point blank what happened. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Maybe we need to start investigating Nancy Pelosi. Why are we not calling Nancy Pelosi in for a full investigation into her actions on January 6th? Because it's her charge to protect the Capitol. But it gets even deeper than that. In order to get the crowd into the United States Capitol, well, that crowd needed help. That crowd needed agent provocateurs. That crowd needed deep state help, actual feds in the audience. And oh, that is an inconvenient narrative for Fox News. So Fox News actually killed the first interview with Stephen Sund. Again, the person who would have all of the answers to what happened that day because he was in charge of security. He's the U.S. Capitol Police Chief. Fired the next day by Nancy Pelosi. Oh, interesting. Never interviewed by the January 6th committee. Oh, interesting. Why is that? Don't ask too many questions. Shut up, shut up, shut up. And so, here's what we were left with. A brand new interview with Stephen Sund, Tucker Carlson Unleashed, said that there was no preparation for any type of riot at the Capitol. In fact, they kept the threats against the Capitol completely secret. Watch this.
And now, we're seeing the intelligence I was getting coming into it was indicating this was going to be just like the previous MAGA rallies, the November and December rallies that we had, where we had limited skirmishes. We had some skirmishes afterwards down by BLM Plaza with some of the Antifa groups and some of the BLM groups. But coming into it, absolutely zero with the intelligence that we know now existed, talking about attacking the Capitol, killing my police officers, attacking members of Congress and killing members of Congress. None of that was included in the intelligence coming up to.
That you received.
Correct.
But others received that intelligence.
Well, we now know FBI, DHS was swimming in that intelligence.
So you've described this as an intelligence failure, but a failure is something that happens accidentally. And I don't see how this could be accidental.
How could this have happened accidentally? It's not. This was something that was planned. And who planned it? Well, for the answer to that question, you need to look at the person who's truly in charge of Capitol security, the person who holds the proverbial and literal gavel as it pertains to who is allowed what security protocols at the Capitol. Kash Patel's been on our show numerous times saying we offered 20,000 National Guard troops, and Pelosi turned them down every single time. So it's Nancy Pelosi. We now have it confirmed from the chief of police. This should be the #1 news in the nation. The U.S. chief of police for Capitol Police at the Capitol for January 6th saying, nope, Pelosi didn't pick up the phone. Pelosi didn't care. Pelosi wanted the mob in the Capitol building because, as you can recall, I've been waiting for this.
Congress passed a law that requires me to go to the Sergeant Arms Capitol Police Board in advance of an event and to request federal resources such as the National Guard. So Congress passed a law. It's 2 U.S. Code 1970. Look it up. Just make sure you look it up before December 22 when they changed it. So what was in effect on the 6th, that requires me to go and get approval for bringing in National Guard or federal assistance in advance. I have to go to the Capitol Police Board and get approval from congressional leadership in advance, like I did on January 3rd. I'm denied twice because of optics and because the intelligence didn't support it. So think about that.
Let me ask you, who made that decision? Who denied you?
I was denied by Paul Irving, House Sergeant Arms, and also Mike Stenger, Senate Sergeant Arms.
And who do
on January 3rd.
Who do they work for?
It would have been working for Pelosi on the House side. That Pelosi was his number one boss, and then McConnell on the Senate side.
Oh, Pelosi was the number one boss. Well, then what happened when Stephen Sund called Nancy Pelosi to get help on January 6th? Listen.
He had some CDU platoons up there. Called him, said, hey, please send those in right away, because we knew as soon as they came to their west front, they started attacking, it was going to be bad. 12:58, I make my first call to the Sergeant Arms, asking, saying, hey, it's bad, we need assistance, I need a declaration of emergency, I need to bring in the military immediately and federal resources. I'm told by Paul Irving, quote, I'm going to run it up the chain, I'll get back to you.
The chain is Pelosi.
The chain his chain would be up to Nancy Pelosi. For the next 71 minutes, I make 32 calls. I'm in the command center. I'm calling my partner agencies, and by law, one of the first people to offer assistance was the United States Secret Service, and by law, I shouldn't have requested their assistance. I shouldn't be until I had approval. But I'm looking at my men and women having their asses handed to them, and my first thought was, we'll take whatever discipline there is. Send me whatever you got. And that's the one tech Secret Service turned over. You know how they lost all their techs?
Yes.
How much will you burn your country to the ground in order for political power? These people are the ghosts in the machine. They don't care about you. They are a godless lot. And if they can't run the country, they'll burn it to ashes. They've proven this. If they can't run the country, they'll destroy it so that no one would want to run this country, so that there's nothing left. It's called a controlled demolition. And there was a controlled demolition at the Capitol. We've played you mountains of footage of police officers opening doors, of doors that are not possible to be opened, getting opened on that morning. Police officers leaving strange bags of equipment all over the United States Capitol, and the official narrative of Jacob Chansley, of course, being blown completely out of proportion as police officers escorted him to the United States Senate for a photo op before he peacefully left the Capitol. They continue to lie to this very day, saying that Jacob Chansley didn't peacefully leave the Capitol. It's all a lie. It was all a setup for political power. Again, this show has always held that anyone who punches a cop or behaves like a hooligan deserves to go to prison, period. But what you can read in the thousands of January 6 cases is that most of these people saw open doors in the Capitol, thought it was a free tour, wandered through the Capitol, and stood inside of the velvet ropes. And who ushered them in? Well, the chief of police says he knows exactly who ushered them in. Watch.
In the aftermath of January 6th, there's been a huge debate over to what extent, there were federal agents or people who are working in some way for federal agencies in the crowd. And the initial explanation was, well, none, and you're insane if you think that. You're Alex Jones, you're crazy. And then over the last couple of years, we've seen people in authority confirm, actually, yeah, there were a lot in the crowd that day. I mean, that's now a fact. Did you know that going in?
No.
No. So just for perspective, since you've been to a lot of these events, there's a huge a planned demonstration in Washington, D.C. Will there always be assets, agents, people working for federal agencies in the crowd in civilian clothes?
There always could be. And for like inaugurations, there would usually be some combined teams out there. One for communications, but just, for situational awareness. So it wouldn't be surprising, 4th of July, different things like that, where we have threat pictures or concerning threat pictures.
Oh, there were feds in the crowd. There was crawling with feds is the exact terminology that he used. That clip, in fact, got leaked from the original interview that Tucker Carlson did to the great shame and humiliation of Fox News. Fox News deleted that interview, so we thought it was important to show it. Tucker Carlson interviewed that same man on April the 6th. But Fox never aired it. Fox didn't delete it. Fox literally silenced it. Never allowed it to air. Because the man who's in charge of security at the Capitol tells the real story of what's really happening. We had to see little clips of it getting leaked out bit by bit. How powerful are these people? Who's actually powerful? if you wish to find out who's actually powerful in your country, all you need to do is ask, who are you not allowed to criticize? Which stories are you not allowed to hear? This is one of them. And so we need to continue to talk about it. Now, yesterday we talked about something that raised quite a few eyebrows and got people a little prickly online. Oh man, we talked about the election fraud story in Michigan. Maybe we can grab that Gateway Pundit article. It's important that you see it. I don't have the definitive proof. If I had the smoking gun proof, I would give it to you, right? In this specific instance, what we laid out yesterday is that there is a chronic problem with election fraud in this country. Election fraud is baked into our system. Hundreds of people a year go to jail for committing election fraud on various levels of scale. Thousands of people are currently serving federal sentences for election fraud, for rigging elections, for cheating in elections. Those are the facts. And so to say that there is no such thing as election fraud, a chronic election fraud problem in this nation, is a lie. And to not look at the available evidence is also to deceive my audience. And I don't do that. We would never. Not here at the Benny Brigade, ladies and gentlemen. Ooh, and get ready. We have some special Benny Brigade stuff for you coming up. So we raised some eyebrows with this report. As far as I know, we're one of the only people with the balls to cover it. But it's worth covering. And we applaud our friends at the Gateway Pundit for covering it. What they have unveiled are, through public records requests, a police operation that busted a massive dark money group that was allegedly registering hundreds of thousands, potentially, illegal voters. At the very least, in one instance, there were 12,000 illegal or suspicious voters registered. Now, what does that mean? Inside of a mail-in vote system, as long as you register the voter, boom, they get a ballot. I got nearly 10 ballots at my house in my domicile in Washington, D.C. I owned a house. It was 1,000 square feet. It was in a very rough block on Capitol Hill. And I got 7 ballots. My buddy got 18 ballots. He lived in a group house. Of course, there weren't 18 people living with him. It was just every person that was ever registered to vote at that address got a ballot. That's how it works. This is how utterly ripe for fraud this is. And yesterday, we went through, we actually played you a clip of Kamala Harris mewling about this process itself. Kamala Harris, absolutely bitching and whining about insecure elections. How bad our election systems are. How dangerous it is to not have a system that both sides agree upon. And Kamala Harris straight up calling for paper ballots. Kamala Harris straight up saying we must have paper ballots, accountability, government ID in order for us to have secure elections. Just a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, that it wasn't too long ago that we had a sane country. Now, I believe you should be able to hear for yourself what the current Vice President of the United States had to say about securing the election back in the day.
Set up systems to audit, but also what they can do around best practices and best machinery. We are talking with them about the fact that it is probably best that you do not have your election system connected to the internet, because that will create greater vulnerabilities. And then look at where we are now in this year of our Lord 2018. We're talking about paper ballots, but that actually might be one of the smartest systems. Going back to, a day when we could have something tangible that we can hold on to, because Russia cannot hack a piece of paper like they can a computer system connected to the internet.
Oh my. Oh no. Did Kamala Harris start January 6th? Somebody bring Kamala Harris in. Those are dangerous right-wing extremist ideologies that she is espousing there. Somebody call in Kamala Harris, please, now, quick.
Second piece you're talking about, which is what people usually mean by election reform, how are you going to keep it from us being able to be in a position where you can manipulate the machines, manipulate the records? The one way to do that is, I think we should pass a federal law mandating that the same machines with paper trails be mandatory for every federal election. That will be a multi-billion-dollar bill for the states, because the states will have to make a choice then. They will have to make a choice whether or not they have 2 machines. We can't mandate, as you know, state elections. We can't tell the state of Delaware or Ohio or Texas what machines and what method they use to vote in their state elections, but we can do it federally. So in a nutshell, I think we should be mandating that we have a paper ballot with a standardized machine, standardized requirement.
We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
Isn't that fascinating? Isn't it fascinating how quickly it moves? Ron Johnson, who has come on the show, we had an interesting interview with Ron Johnson. He came on the show. Man, Ron Johnson dropped some absolute fire that really buckled in the point that we were trying to make yesterday, which was that COVID-19 was the Trojan horse to get mail-in balloting and the permanent destruction of our voter systems across the finish line. Here we go. You create panic in people. I'm not saying COVID isn't real. COVID's real. COVID was created. We know who created it. We know how it happened. We know the process. The documents are all there. You can go see Fauci created it. Fauci straight up admits it. Straight up admits it. He admits that he funded the Wuhan laboratory, that they were doing goblin-like, Frankenstein, barbaric gain-of-function research, and they snipped together a spike protein that could infect a human being. Boom. Bingo, bango, bongo. So simple that Jon Stewart actually famously was able to get it. And so we know that COVID is real. We know where COVID came from. We know how COVID was created. What was the usefulness of it? Well, it was able to get permanent mail-in balloting across the finish line, scaring the hell out of little old people and out of mid-wit Republicans everywhere in Pennsylvania and Michigan, Wisconsin. Drop boxes, got it? We'll put a drop box up. You'll be able to mail in and drop in your vote because, people are scary. You can't be around other people. Ron Johnson had this clip out this morning. He's a senator from Wisconsin that just absolutely nails it on what we were talking about yesterday. We didn't know Ron Johnson was going to say this, but we posited that the panic and the fear around COVID was very useful for getting this ballot measure across the finish line that the left has always wanted. Ron Johnson saying the exact same thing. Watch.
The government was working with social media to amplify lies and suppress truth and has been doing so repeatedly. Why couldn't the American people know that, there were other alternatives to treat COVID? Why can't the American people know that there were side effects with the vaccine?
This was all pre-planned by an elite group of people. That's what I'm talking about. Event 201 that occurred in late 2019, prior to the rest of us knowing about this pandemic. Again, this is very concerning in terms of what has happened, what is happening, what continues to be planned for our loss of freedom. Again, it needs to be exposed, but unfortunately, there are very few people, even in Congress, that are willing to take a look at this. We're up against a very powerful group of people here, Maria. But fortunately, you say, what can we do? Well, we do have reporters like yourself, like John Solomon, other people that have the courage to report the truth against the mainstream media and against the narrative. But that's the only way this is going to be solved, is we need the truth to be exposed. We need more Americans to listen to the truth, to be exposed to the truth, to pull their heads out of the sand, quite honestly, open up their eyes and understand what is happening.
Did you just hear what you just said there? Yo, they have something planned. They're still planning right now to take all of your freedoms away. You ready for that? Dude, Ron Johnson's awake.
Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization.